Hi, my name is Mirkka Koivusalo. I'm the owner of Mindful Behaviors. I welcome you to this recorded version of our Humans Only orientation, which is an introduction to all the students registered in our Life Skills for Puppies or Life Skills programs. The reason why we do this orientation before you come to an actual class with your puppy or your older dog is because we'd like to get you on board on how our classes work. And first and foremost, it's important for you to know how to be prepared for the classes so that the class is going to be a successful experience for both you and your dog. We will also talk about the principles, the basic principles of how dogs learn and how you will become a skillful trainer for your dog. Because even though we call ourselves dog trainers, we are actually people trainers. Our task, our job is to train you how to train your dog. We have two instructors at our school, myself, Mirkka Koivusalo. My dog training certification is through an institution called Care and Prior Academy. I am a Care and Prior Academy certified training partner. Our other instructor is Marilyn Aston, and she is a certified professional dog trainer, knowledge assessed. You might be seeing either one of us or both of us in class. Whoever is teaching your class, the content will be the same because all of our classes, they have a set theme and both of us instructors, we do the same behaviors under every theme. A few general words about our training philosophy. You may have chosen us because of the fact that we represent positive reinforcement training. Positive reinforcement is something that we use in exchange for polite behaviors that the dog offers for us. We will use a clicker. Later in this orientation, I will guide you through the principles of clicker training in more detail. And we will be using a lot of food, even with the type of dog who tends to be picky. Again, I will guide you through how to make the training successful even with those dogs. But the way our training works is that our goal is not to bribe the dog because dogs tend to be very cheeky. If they see that we have the food in our hand, they're going to be well behaved and they're going to do the behaviors for us. But if they don't see the food, they will make a very careful cost-benefit analysis and decide that it's not worth it for them to do those behaviors. So we try and avoid bribery. And the way we train, it's actually based on science and learning theory, not urban legends. When it comes to our training, we don't advocate any of those aversive training methods that more sort of traditional dog training heavily relies on. We don't use pinch collars, choke chains, prong collars, electric collars, those shake hands that you throw at your dog in an attempt to startle them or pin them down until they submit. Then how to get the classes actually started. Since you are listening to this orientation, you obviously have already registered into our classes. While listening to the presentation, I will provide you with 3 secret passwords that I would ask you to email to me once you listen to this presentation and then process the payment if you haven't already done so. And then after we have received these 2 things, we will send you a confirmation email that will contain something that we call the Life Skills Manual. This is a rather long PDF file that contains recipes for all the behaviors that we will be practicing in class. It also has other important information related to dog training and dog behavior. You will also get notes from this presentation in the same email, as well as a copy of our group class service agreement. What we would ask you to do is when you come to class, bring a signed copy of the service agreement with you, or if you're not able to print it out, that's totally fine. We also have blank copies in the classroom and then you can sign one once you get to class. So here is a little bit more information about the content of our classes. If you have registered into our Life Skills for Puppies class, this is a puppy socialization class for puppies roughly up to 16 weeks of age. In Life Skills for Puppies, we do 2 different types of exercises. We do a lot of socialization exercises. What this entails is getting puppies used to different kinds of weird things that are part of living in the human society, things like skateboards, fast-moving objects, umbrellas, different kinds of people. We want to also teach them social skills, how to play appropriately with other puppies. We do quite a bit of handling exercises because it's so important for puppies to get used to being touched in different parts of their bodies when you go to the vet or to the groomer or need to clip their nails and things like that. We also do important foundation behaviors, but just so that you know, we do these two different sort of categories of exercises. If you are coming into our life skills classes, this is a more extensive program which is meant for any dog 4 months or older. And in life skills, we heavily focus on foundation behaviors to get you that well-mannered pet that all of us obviously want. We also talk quite a bit about prevention of most common behavior problems. And first and foremost, we, the instructors, we will teach you how to train your dog. If after these basic classes you decide that training is great and both you and your dog really enjoy it, which we truly hope that both of you will, we also have more advanced classes available after these levels. We have something called a Canine Good Neighbor Prep class. This is a class where we go through exercises that are part of Canadian Kennel Club's Canine Good Neighbor test. And all of the exercises are targeted towards testing whether your dog is a fit member of human society. We also have rally obedience classes. Rally obedience, it's a form of sort of more formal obedience where we do lots of heel work, focus work. What rally obedience is all about is you go through a set course that has different kinds of signs with different kinds of exercises, and the sign at each station will tell you what to do. Then we also have scent detection classes, which is really fun for all the dogs. What we do in scent detection, we teach them to search, locate, and report a particular scent that they have found. And the principle is exactly the same as drug dogs or bomb detection dogs looking for these things. Dogs that you see at the airport sniffing suitcases. So obviously we use legal scents, but the principle of training is exactly the same, and it's a really good exercise for, especially for young dogs who have a lot of energy. It tends to engage their brains in a very, very good way. Sometimes private training may be a better option, and what sometimes happens, not often, but sometimes, is that when a dog comes to class, we notice that the dog is way too stressed to be able to learn in a classroom environment. The dog may be a little bit reactive towards other dogs, afraid of people, and this is something that we definitely need to take into account in the learning process, because if the dog is feeling a lot of stress, they are not able to learn in the classroom environment. And the purpose of training is always to set the learner up for success. And in these cases, what we actually do then is we switch the dogs to private sessions. It doesn't mean that the dog has failed. This is just for everybody's benefit, because it's so important that your dog gets started with the training on the right foot, and you want them to learn the things that we actually want them to learn. How the classes work. We ask, obviously, only healthy dogs to come to class. When you bring your, or when you sign your group class service agreement, there is a section where you will say that if your dog is sick and shows particular signs of sickness or illness, you will not be bringing them to class. The life skills for puppies, it's 5 classes altogether. Life skills for older dogs, it's 8 classes altogether. And the way our classes work is that we have something called a rolling registration, which means that you can get started as soon as there is availability in the curriculum. And you may already know your starting date. If you don't, we will definitely send you your first available starting date in the confirmation email that you'll be getting. And if you need to miss a class, that is not a problem at all. You can totally cancel one class. In medical emergencies, we are understanding, and you may be able to cancel more than one class. But if you need to cancel, what we ask you to do is please do it at least 24 hours in advance. Otherwise, the class may be considered used. Because of our registration system, the registration levels fluctuate, and sometimes there may only be 2 dogs registered for a class, and then if it's a no-show for both dogs and the teacher is there and we still need to pay rent to the store where the classes are held, those classes we will need to consider used. But again, if it's a medical emergency or something happens, like you're stuck in traffic or your car breaks down, we are understanding about it. If you cancel a class, something to bear in mind is that every class has a theme, And if you miss a particular theme, it might be a little bit challenging for us to organize a makeup session for you in the exact same theme, because the same theme will come up again in the curriculum 5 weeks or 8 weeks later. But usually this is not a big issue, because the most important foundation behaviors that we work on, they will come up more than once in the curriculum. And also because our class size is small, everybody gets individualized attention, and usually you don't miss anything, even if you miss one theme. About some rules at the training hall. Our training hall is located at Bauhound House, which is on Main Street in Milton. When you come to your class, you actually need to enter via the store. There is a side door, but usually it is locked. If you feel that your dog is not going to be comfortable in the store area, we can certainly open the side door for you on request, but please let us know beforehand if this is something that you'd like to do. When you come to the store and the classroom, a good rule of thumb to remember is to give space to others and not necessarily assume that other dogs are just as friendly as your dog is. When coming to the store, we obviously don't have any sort of aggressive dogs coming, but some dogs don't necessarily appreciate another dog right in their face, a dog that they don't know. And this is something good to remember for life in general as well, because the last thing that you want, especially for little puppies, is for them to get a bad experience because an older dog snarled at them a little bit when they went too close. So just remember to give everybody their personal space. Of course, when you get to know people and you get their permission, then you can let the dogs greet, but let's give everybody a little bit of a personal space bubble. When you come to class, and especially when you have been coming to a couple of classes and you already know how the training works, something important to remember is that the training actually starts as soon as you exit your car. Because if you come to the training hall and only in the training hall you start looking for your treats and all of your equipment, there's a fair chance that your dog has already pulled you all the way to the training hall and practiced pulling and all those behaviors that we don't want them necessarily to practice. So just keep this in mind, that your dog learns every second that they are awake. And then when you come into the training hall, which is in the basement of the store, what we ask you to do is focus on your own dog. And the way the room is set up is that we use visual barriers so that every dog has their own spot. So when you come downstairs, just pick any available spot and get your dog settled on their mat. We'll talk a little bit about the mat in more detail in the next slide, but this is something that we would like every dog to go and settle on. Instead of turning the class into a social gathering as soon as you enter the classroom, we want to keep the dog's brains in a working mode. So this is important that you really focus on your own dog and just try and give everybody a little bit of privacy. What to bring to class? This is probably the most important slide in this whole presentation. You are going to need a lot of treats, and here it says between 200 and 300 pieces. It sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but you might be surprised how quickly you start going through the treats when we actually start training, because training is very repetitive, and to build those repetitions you're going to need a huge number of treats. It doesn't mean that you will go through all of them, but we find that it's better to have extra rather than to run out, because if you need to, for example, go upstairs to the store and buy more treats, it tends to interrupt the flow of your class. Then when it comes to the size of the treats, here it says pea-sized or smaller treats. That is a rule of thumb, and the size of the treats totally depends on the size of your dog. If you have a smaller breed or if you have a very, very small puppy, I suggest that you try and cut them as small as you possibly can, because training is all about repetition. If the dog gets a humongous meatball every time they do one set, they're going to be full in no time, and then the class will be over. Then the second item on the list is something called a treat pouch. Treat pouch is where you are going to have your treats. You can see a picture of one kind of a treat pouch at the top on this slide. The purpose is that the treats have to be invisible but very accessible, and you can imagine if you have the treats in a little plastic baggie in the pocket of your jeans and then you start fishing for the treats while you're training, it's going to take you way too long a time to get the treats to your dog in time. So the treat pouch, you can get it at most pet stores these days. There are different kinds, different varieties. It doesn't really matter what it is. If you happen to have one of those fanny packs somewhere in a closet at home, you can certainly bring that as well. People have also used aprons with big pockets or tool belts, or if you happen to be a climber and you have an old chalk bag for climbing, as long as it works for you, it doesn't have to be pretty as long as it's functional. Then you will have to bring your clicker. If you don't already have a clicker, don't worry about it at all. You will get clickers in your first class. Clicker is a little plastic box that you can see at the photo under the treat pouch here. We'll talk about the principle of clicker training in a minute, but that's an important tool to remember to bring with you. And then what the dog should be wearing is any kind of a regular flat collar or a harness would be good. If you're in doubt, you can always ask us if your dog is wearing a particular type of a collar. But as I mentioned earlier, we don't allow those aversive training collars like choke chains or pinch collars. And then the type of leash that the dog should have, any kind of a flat leash works. We are not big fans of those retractable leashes in a training situation because they actually tend to teach your dog how to pull effectively. And if your dog is actually already a bit of a hardcore puller, there are different types of tools available. Something that we usually recommend is a front clip harness. You can see the dog in the picture here is wearing one. The idea behind this front clip harness is that the leash attachment is actually at the chest, and this way if the dog pulls, it actually turns them to face you a little bit. It is a very useful tool. Also, some people like to use those head halter type of things or gentle leaders. If your dog is fine with them, those can be acceptable and good tools as well if properly used. But as I said, if you're in doubt, do send me an email and we can discuss it. If your dog has a favorite toy, such as a rope toy or some sort of a tug or a ball, you can certainly bring the toy as well, because in both the puppy class and in the life skills class, we will practice how to play tug with dogs appropriately, with those dogs who really enjoy it. Not every dog necessarily enjoys it. Then you're going to need to bring some kind of a mat for your dog to settle on. The purpose of the mat is that for dogs who are a little bit maybe unsettled or shy in a new environment, it's going to be their comfort blanket because it's something familiar from home. And then for those dogs who tend to get super distracted and excited about the sight of new people, new dogs, new sounds, it will keep them out of trouble. What the mat is, ultimately, I would recommend bringing something that you can easily pack up and put in your bag when you come to class. It doesn't have to be the big fluffy dog bed that you have at home. It can be, for example, a little doormat or an old towel or an old t-shirt. They definitely do the job. And then to help the dogs to relax and settle on their mats, you're going to need something that I call the PlayStation. This is a management tool that is going to keep your dog busy while we have breaks, and by far the easiest solution tends to be a filled Kong or some sort of an edible chewy bone. Here is your first secret password, treat pouch. A few more words about the PlayStation. This is such an important management tool to help your dog settle, and the reason why I spend a little bit more time talking about it is because I can almost guarantee that most students who don't bring a Kong or who haven't prepared the Kong appropriately, they will feel frustrated and disappointed in the class. Kong is a hollow rubber toy that you can keep refilling with tasty stuff, and when you think about the shell, the Kong, as the PlayStation, what really is the most important part is the game inside the Kong. The game inside the Kong, it has to be interesting and long-lasting for the dog. And if you are wondering about what sort of things to use, you can always go to your life skills manual, the longer PDF file that you will get in your confirmation email. There is a little section that talks about recipes, Kong recipes. You can always go there. But the bottom line is that I recommend putting in something soft and stinky. What I mean by this is it could be something like cream cheese, unsweetened yogurt, wet dog food, mashed potato, banana, whatever your dog really, really enjoys. And if your dog tends to be the type of dog who will empty the Kong in about 30 seconds, a really good tip is to turn it into a Kongsicle. In other words, put it in the freezer, and that way it's going to last much longer. And when it comes to different kinds of Kong stuffings, if you're not sure or if your dog tends to be a little bit picky, it's definitely worthwhile your effort to do a little bit of experimentation before your first class. So try a few different things. Something that has never really let me down so far is liverwurst, which is like a liver pate. But you need to be a little bit mindful because for some dogs who have sensitive tummies, it can be a little bit tough on them. And of course, when you're filling the Kong, if your dog has any food sensitivity issues, you need to take those into consideration. And if you're in doubt, please do ask us. Alternatively, if you are in the habit of giving your dog really tasty edible bones, such as marrow bones or knuckle bones, something that they really spend a long time eating and chewing, and something that they really enjoy, that is something that you can also bring as a substitute for the PlayStation or a different kind of a PlayStation if you like. Then let's talk a little bit more detail about what kinds of treats to bring to class. The most important thing about any kind of successful animal training is that to train the dog or any animal, we need to have something that they want in their pocket. What I mean by something that they want is that it has to be something that they really want and not something that we think that they want. The reason why we heavily focus on food in the initial stages of learning is because we need to have a reinforcement that is close to the animal's survival from an evolutionary point of view. And when it comes to different options, myself or any other trainer that I know, we haven't really found any other reinforcement that would work as effectively. Food is convenient, and when you put it really bluntly, the survival of the dog depends on it, and if the dog doesn't eat, they die. What I mean by this is that often people ask us trainers what to do with a dog who is not food motivated. I totally understand what it's like to try and train a dog who is picky when it comes to food. Personally, I always tend to have at least one of those dogs in my household. Then we just need to be a little bit more creative, because when the dog is hungry enough and when we really have something tasty and something that they absolutely love, that's when the training really starts to kick in. What kind of treats to bring then? On the top picture there, I actually have put a little picture. There's some chicken and there's liverwurst and then these dry little rawhide little bits and pieces. So I can almost guarantee that if a dog got to choose from these different options, they would definitely go first for the liverwurst and the chicken. Some dogs really like their kibble food, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with using kibble for training when you are at home or in another low distraction environment. But even for the craziest food motivated dog out there, I would say kibble in class is yuck. Because classroom, it's a high distraction environment, there's lots of smells and sounds and other dogs. I am 99% of the certain that you are going to need some bigger guns, something more valuable to the dog than the kibble. There are a whole variety of different kinds of dog treats in pet stores. Whatever kind of treat you go for, I would recommend again something soft and stinky. And personally, I'm a big fan of human grade food, things like chicken, beef, liver, steak, cheese, meatballs. People often ask us trainers, why should I use human grade food? I really don't want my dog to learn how to beg when we have dinner at home. My answer to this concern would be that if we were eating kibble on a plate with a knife and fork while we're having dinner, I'm pretty sure dogs will be begging for the kibble as well. What is important to realize is that it all depends on what do we give the food as a consequence to. If I give chicken from my plate when my dog is begging beside me, that is the behavior I'm reinforcing. But if I go and deliver chicken from my plate to the dog who lays down on their mat, for example, that is the behavior I'm reinforcing. Or if I give my dog a piece of liver when they do a fantastic recall across a hydro field outside, they definitely deserve a high value reinforcement. So it all comes down to what the reinforcement is delivered as a consequence to. If you don't want to use human grade food, or if you don't feel like cooking for your dog, that's totally fine as well. Meatballs tend to be a pretty good option. There are pet versions out there as well. Two relatively good commercial soft and stinky treats are something called rollover and natural balance, which you should be able to find in most pet stores. They look like a sausage and you can slice it and dice it into little treats. So this is sort of my advice on what types of treats to use. If you are in doubt, ask us. And again, if your dog has any type of food sensitivities, you need to definitely take those into consideration. Dogs who tend to have sensitive tummies, boiled chicken breast usually tends to be a pretty safe option. As I said earlier, we focus on food heavily, but that is usually more so in the initial stages of training. When we start to get strong behaviors, we can absolutely use other things to reinforce them as well, such as toys. If your dog loves a particular toy, our attention is a huge reinforcer for most puppies, most dogs. That's how they usually learn how to jump on people, because any kind of attention, even negative attention, is attention. We can use environmental things such as permission to go and play with their doggy friends, permission to go and sniff the ground. We can certainly use things like this as a reinforcement for good behaviors as well. And of course, you're going to bring the dog to the class as well. How to prepare the dogs for this experience? A few tips. You want to make sure that your dog is hungry enough, because if your dog has had their dinner already, or if you're coming to a morning class and they've had their breakfast, there's a fair chance that they are not going to value the food too much because they just simply are not hungry enough. If you have the type of dog who is the picky type, personally, I have no objection. I'm going to use the word starve here. I have no objection starving the dog a little bit. I'm not talking about not feeding your dog for 2 weeks, but definitely skip a meal. Don't give them any breakfast. Don't give them their previous meal. You can even skip 2 meals. There's no harm done unless your dog has some sort of a medical condition. You just want to make sure that they're hungry enough, because you will notice the difference how much faster our training will start to kick in when the dog is really, really hungry. When it comes to using food as a reinforcement, if you have been in the habit of free feeding your dog, our recommendation would be not to do that anymore, because if the dogs have an all-you-can-eat buffet available to them at all times, they will consider working for food not worth the effort. And when it comes to free feeding, I don't really see particular benefits to it, especially if you have a puppy. If they are free feeding, that will lead to irregular bowel movement and your potty training is going to be a little bit more challenging. Also, when it comes to free feeding, some kibble brands, they may actually go a little bit stale if you leave it out. So what I would recommend is, if your dog is picky and doesn't eat that food immediately when you put it down, leave it down for 5 minutes, then remove it, and the next available time for them to eat is going to be at the next meal time. And if they skip a meal or two, there's not going to be anything harmful happening to them. Again, if there's some sort of an underlying medical condition, that might be different. But any healthy dog, they will not starve themselves to death. So leave it down for 5 minutes and then pick it up if they don't eat it. Sooner or later they'll figure out that, hey, rules have changed, I better start eating up a little bit faster. Then when it comes to the energy level of the dog when you come to class, if you have a high energy, young, adolescent dog, it might be a good idea to give them a little bit of exercise that day before you come to class. You, at this point, obviously know your dog. I don't know your dogs. We don't know your dogs at all yet. So use common sense. I don't mean that you need to go and run them until they pretty much come to classroom and sleep, but just so that the edge is taken off, because if you have a high energy young dog and if they're jumping up and down and climbing all over the place when you come to class, it can be quite chaotic. A few words about expectations. You as a student, the reason why you're coming to class is obviously because you want to have a well-behaved dog and a good family member. You may be thinking that some dog sports later might be a good idea. And we, the instructors, it is our job to give you that dog, and we really want you to have that well-behaved dog. But the way it works is that unfortunately we don't have any magic wands. And what we always say is that for you to get the dog who has those nice manners, it happens through commitment and sticking to the learned methodology. So unfortunately, just coming to class once a week and only doing those exercises in class, it's not going to be enough. The point of the training is that we, the instructors, give you, the students, the tools so that you know how to implement them at home and how to interact with your dog. Then the third party in the equation is the dog, and they just want to be dogs. They really don't care about our expectations at all. Dogs are pretty simple creatures. They just want to get what they want, and they want to get it immediately. So when it comes to dogs, every dog is an individual, and when you are practicing the exercises at home, if something doesn't work, please let us know sooner rather than later, because our goal is to help you as your dog's owners and handlers to be successful. If something doesn't work, let us know and we will help you troubleshoot it together. Next, we will switch gears a little bit and we'll go through the principles of how dogs learn. So far, if you have any questions about how to be prepared for class, any questions about your dog, treats, Kongs, things like that, send us an email and we are more than happy to help you. How dogs learn, it is actually a pretty simple concept, but when it comes to dog training, it is one of those fields where if you start Googling things, or you listen to different people, you listen to people in the dog park, you may have noticed that there is a lot of conflicting information out there. Contrary to what we people would like to think, dogs really do not perform behaviors for us because they tell them to, or because they want to please us, or because we are the superior species. You may have heard a word called dominance, which is again something that you may hear a lot in the dog park when dogs are interacting and playing, and some trainers, they use this as a basis for their training. But dominance actually, when it comes to training your dog, it's not a method. It is actually a social hierarchy in a group of wild animals. And in the light of current scientific knowledge that has expanded a lot in the past couple of decades, we know that this does not really apply to the human-animal bond at all. And if you look at this dog on the couch there, having a nice nap, looking really comfortable, some may call it dominance, but I think the dog just chose the couch because it's so much more comfortable than the floor. How do dogs learn then? So dogs are very selfish. They do behaviors to us because they either want to get something that they like this little bone in the picture, or they're trying to avoid something that they dislike, like a squirt from a bottle. So when it comes down to it, dog training, this is everything pretty much that you would need to know in a nutshell. It all comes down to what type of a consequence happens right after the behavior, and what training is all about. It's all about mastering those consequences. When it comes to these consequences, we have two different types. First of all, let's talk about reinforcement. Reinforcement, as the word already suggests, it is something that will make more behavior happen. You get more behavior when you reinforce it. And our primary training tool is called positive reinforcement. And what this means is that positive reinforcement is given in exchange for polite behaviors to the dog. And positive reinforcement, technically, it can be anything that the dog wants. We've talked about the importance of food, how we heavily focus on it just because of its convenience, but other things work as well. For dogs who are toy crazy, toys definitely work. Human attention tends to be a reinforcement to some dogs, not to all dogs though. It totally depends on the dog. And things in the environment, such as permission to go and play with other dogs, these are all positive reinforcements for most dogs. And these are our primary training tools. There is another type of reinforcement that is also at play in our everyday lives, and I just like to mention it here. It is a little bit more tricky to use this to our advantage in training. This is something called a negative reinforcement, meaning if something unpleasant goes away from the dog's environment when they're doing a particular behavior, this behavior gets a huge jackpot. The most classic example, I'd say, is given away by this little cartoon here where a dog is chasing a poor delivery person away. And you may have noticed in your neighborhood or wherever you go, there are quite a few dogs who like to bark behind the door or behind the window. The reason why this barking tends to spread like fire and gets reinforced like crazy is because if the dog is sitting at the window and they see the delivery person coming, or the pizza guy, they start barking, and they bark, bark, bark because their intention is to get the evil intruder to go away. And while they're barking, obviously, the delivery person has to leave, and the dog thinks that the barking worked again. The guy who tries to break into every house in the neighborhood left when I barked. I'm the king of the neighborhood. So barking got a huge jackpot. As you can appreciate, it's a little bit more challenging to use this for training purposes. Of course, we could try and train the mailmen to stand there until the dog is quiet, but realistically that's not going to happen. But I just would like you to be mindful of this type of a reinforcement as well. So if the dog gets something that they consider unpleasant to go away by doing something, this behavior is reinforced. Here is your second secret password: reinforcement. The other type of a consequence that molds our dog's behavior is punishment. And as the name suggests, punishment is always something that will suppress behavior, and the purpose of punishments in training is to get rid of behaviors that we humans term as bad or behaviors that we consider unwanted. When we think of punishments, usually we think of unpleasant things, and this is something called a positive punishment because the punishment is added to the dog's environment. And this is a training methodology that more traditional dog training heavily relies on. And roughly, I'd say around 30 years ago, most dog trainers would have been using things like choke chains, prong collars, pinch collars, electric collars, alpha rolls, those shake hands. And the purpose of this is to get rid of unwanted behaviors fast. There is no doubt about it that aversive training techniques, they work, and we do get rid of behaviors fast and efficiently. But when we start digging a little bit deeper into these training methods, we have now realized that there are a lot of hidden cans of worms that we can all of a sudden open up, and it's very important to be aware of these because potentially, if we use really aversive training methods, we may actually get an animal, a dog, who will retaliate and who may become aggressive. So here is just the list of dangers attached to aversive training methods. First of all, it's easy to increase fearful behaviors. You have seen or may have seen these poor puppy mill rescue dogs who are absolutely terrified of people, and the reason is, well, they may not have much interaction with people, but usually they haven't been treated well by people, and that's why they are so extremely fearful. If we start using aversive training methods with dogs who have a little bit of a backbone, it can actually turn out into a very dangerous game because those dogs most likely will retaliate and we might get redirected aggression targeted towards us. For example, if there is a big, let's say Rottweiler male growling at me when they're eating a bone and I approach them and they start growling, I will not put my hand anywhere near them because I don't want to get bitten. There are much more effective and safer training methods around those sort of behavior issues. Then when it comes to using punishments, timing is really difficult because we have to be there the second when the dog is getting into trouble. If you have a puppy or a young dog, you may have been in the situation where you just momentarily leave the room and then you come back to the room and you notice that the remote control is chewed up once again and the puppy doesn't seem to care. We obviously get angry because we're people and it's like the third remote control this month that I bought. But unless we are there the second when the puppy is chewing it, they have no way of understanding what the punishment or our change of mood is for. So they definitely will start to do all sorts of appeasement behaviors, but they have no way of understanding that it's the remote control that I was chewing 30 seconds ago. We have to be there the second when it's happening. Something important to realize about the use of punishments is that we need to punish the dog every single time when the unwanted behavior is happening. For example, if we choose to use leash corrections every time the dog pulls, and we yank the leash and give a sharp leash correction every time the dog pulls, let's say on Monday, and then on Tuesday morning you're in a hurry to get to work and you just need your dog to do their business fast and you let them pull, you are actually undoing all the training that you did the day before because the dog learned that, okay, sometimes it feels a little bit awkward and uncomfortable, but it's always worth trying to pull because every now and again I have a chance to do it. So it's super, super important to realize that we need to be there every single time to punish the dog. If we are then really good at using aversive training techniques, something important to realize as well is that perfect punishment is a one-time learning experience, so that we only have to do it once and once only, and that's the end of discussion. This is something that you may have, or you may in the future realize that sometimes it magically just happens by accident. For example, you left a coffee mug at the edge of the table. Your dog tries to jump on the table, and then the coffee mug falls on the floor, and they get a bit of a fright, and after that they will stay away from the kitchen table. Or you are going through a doorway and you accidentally step on your dog's toes, and they realize that, okay, my human is really clumsy. When we go through the doorways, I better stay away. So if something like this happens, those are perfect punishments in the sense that it was a one-time learning experience and we never have to do it again. But if we start using punishments intentionally, not necessarily with the two examples that I used there, the coffee mug or stepping on the dog's toes, but let's say we decide to use punishments and our goal is to make it a one-time learning experience. The trouble that we run into is that we don't know how much is enough for that particular dog. If we use too little, they will just find it annoying and it's not effective because it's just a little bit annoying. And then if we really crank it up and we go all the way to the other end of the spectrum and we deliver a very harsh punishment, we may actually end up having a dog who is completely shut down, a dog who generalizes that fear, for example, to the whole building or the whole area where it happened, and then we have a whole other problem at our hands. The last danger here attached to using versive training techniques, and this is something that we are very rarely aware of, we have no way of knowing what the dog associates the punishment with. This is something that we have to realize every time we use an aversive training technique. For example, let's say I have decided to train my dog by using leash corrections. Every time they pull, I'm going to give them a leash correction. How about when they see their dog friends across the street and they start pulling towards those dogs? I deliver those leash corrections as soon as the dog sees the dog, and then the next day I may be wondering why all of a sudden is my dog barking and lunging and behaving aggressively towards those same dogs. This is where learning by association or classical conditioning has taken place. If the dog has received that leash correction consistently every time right after they have seen another dog, they will start to think that it was the sight of the other dog that made the pain happen in their neck. That's why they need to try and get rid of the other dog by behaving aggressively. Or, for example, let's say there is an electric fencing around the front yard and the dog is hanging out in the yard, and then the school bus pulls over and the neighbor's kid comes down and starts walking home, and the dog sees the kid and goes, "Oh my God, there's my friend." They start running towards the kid and then they get zapped. Again, learning by association may take place where the dog thinks that, okay, it's the child which made this horrible pain happen, therefore I need to start behaving aggressively towards the child. So these are the dangers while using aversive training techniques. It's a very slippery slope, and that's why we try and stay away from this type of training methods to the best of our ability. But there is another type of punishment that we will and we can use. It is also a punishment if we take something pleasant away from the dog when they are doing a particular behavior. This is something called a negative punishment, negative meaning we're taking something away. The way we use this in training is that we will remove the resource that the dog wants when the dog is being rude. I'll give a couple of examples. For example, when I'm taking a dog out, if they try and rush through the door when I open the door, I will close the door immediately. Okay, being careful, of course, so that your dog doesn't get caught in between the door. But I want them to learn that when I start opening the door, the only way for them to keep me opening the door is by doing something polite, such as sit and eye contact. Rushing and jumping and all that crazy business is not going to make the door open at all. Or another example would be puppy nipping. Puppy nipping is very annoying, can be very painful. But usually for puppies, any kind of attention is attention. Even if it's yelling no and pushing and shoving, there's a fair chance that we're just reinforcing that behavior by doing all of that stuff. By far, a far effective method is to remove the resource, which in this case is actually the person present. So when the demon puppy comes out with the needle-sharp teeth, it's very important to stick to a timeout where you, if you can, go to another room, you go on the other side of the baby gate, or you're going to put the puppy on the other side of the baby gate as soon as the rude behavior is happening. So this is our training tool, absolutely. We take good stuff, pleasant things, something that the dog wants, we take them away when they are not behaving appropriately. After all this talk about different types of consequences, let's then go through the principles of how positive reinforcement training works. Something important to realize is that positive is by no means the same as permissive. We can always stop harmful activities from happening. Even though we're positive reinforcement trainers, it doesn't mean that we let the dog to do whatever they want. If they try and grab the beef sandwich that you left on the kitchen table, or they are trying to get into the flower pot to dig all the dirt out, of course you can stop those harmful activities from happening. But the way training works is that dogs live as a part of human society. Even though we have this very long co-evolution with our canine companions, they really cannot know what we want. They really always do what works for them. And what training is all about, it is actually training your dog what to do instead of always focusing on what not to do. Think about it this way. Every time you take a cab somewhere, you usually, I'm pretty sure, you will give the address to the cab driver. Next time when you take a cab, how about not giving the address to the cab driver, just start driving, and every time when they make a wrong turn, just give them a good old slap on the cheek. You probably will get to your destination eventually, but it's going to be much, much slower and much, much more frustrating. And this is sort of what our training is all about, shifting the perspective on actually teaching the dog what to do. Here are 3 common examples that we quite heavily focus on all of our classes. Instead of jumping on people to get the attention, we teach them something called sit to greet, which means I would like you to park your bum on the ground, and that's how you get attention. Instead of pulling on leash, we teach them how to walk politely beside us. This is something that we call polite walking. With puppies, instead of doing the crazy nipping, we do exercise where we teach them to use their mouths gently. How do we then teach our dogs what to do in different scenarios? Something important to realize about training is that timing is absolutely everything, and that is why we use the principle of clicker training. Clicker training may or may not be a word that you have heard before, but clicker is this plastic box. You saw a picture of one type of a clicker earlier in the presentation, and this is something that we will provide you with when you come to your first class with your dog, or you may already have one. The way the clicker works is that the very first thing to do is to condition it. And the way we do it is that we teach the dog that every time we click, they are going to get a piece of tasty treat. This conditioning step, it is purely classical conditioning. We want the clicker to become like Pavlov's bell. When this connection is established, which usually, by the way, doesn't take a long time, when you have a treat that the dog really wants, I'd say it takes something between 30 seconds and 1 minute for them to understand the connection. Then we move on to the second step and we start using the clicker as our valuable training tool. Whatever behavior we're training, what we do is we click during the wanted behavior and then we treat. For example, if I were to train a dog to offer me eye contact, I click every time they turn their head to look at me, and then I give them the treat, and I keep repeating it until they start to realize that, hey, staring at that person really works, because the click is like a bridge or a camera. It gives the dog very precise information. It tells the dog that's what you get paid for. And it's always amazing to watch how all the dogs, they will start offering the behavior they were doing when they heard that magical sound. Why do we then focus on this plastic device called the clicker? Is it not a little bit cumbersome sometimes, a little bit annoying? I don't always have the clicker with me. Yes, absolutely. It sometimes can be a little bit of headache to have it with you all the times, but what we do with the clicker is we actually use it for training new behaviors, because the information that the clicker gives to the dog, it's extremely clear. It's always unambiguous, because no matter who is using the clicker, the sound is actually exactly the same. And definitely using the clicker is going to make your train much faster. Once you adopt the technique, you're going to get your dog doing the behaviors that you want in a much quicker way. Having said all of this though about the box clicker, more than anything else, training is all about the principle of clicker training, meaning you don't need to have a surgical procedure where you have the clicker implanted in your hand. You can do excellent training without actually using the clicker, because you can always use a verbal event marker. So most people use something like a happy punctual yes or good girl or good boy followed by a treat after, and you can do amazing training. But as I said earlier, the reason why we do initially use the box clicker is because it's going to make your training more clear and faster. A common question for people starting clicker training is, do I need to keep clicking and treating forever for the same old sit or shake a paw? The answer is no, definitely not. Clicker is a tool that we use only for training new behaviors. Something important to realize though is that every time you decide to use that box clicker, it should always be followed by a treat. The way it works is that when we are working on new behaviors, first we are vending machines. We click and treat every time when the behavior is happening until it's nice and strong. And then when the dog already knows the behavior, we don't need the precision of the clicker anymore. We can leave the clicker out of the training, but we still need to randomly reward the dog with something. It can be treats. It doesn't always have to be treats though. It can be toy. It can be those life rewards that we talked about earlier, such as go say hi to your favorite friend or go and sniff the ground. But if we stop the paycheck arriving from altogether, it's the same as just getting a warm, even though friendly, handshake from your boss on every other payday, and then all of a sudden realize that, okay, it's only the handshake from now on and no paycheck at all. It's so important to keep some sort of a reinforcement system going because nobody works for free. So this is something that we call the slot machine analogy. So initially when you're training behaviors, you are a vending machine. When the behavior is learned, you don't need the clicker anymore, then you become a slot machine. Here is your third secret password, slot machine. Training order is important in training new behaviors to our dogs. When we're training brand new behaviors, the very first thing that we need to do is to get the behavior. There are different ways of getting behaviors that you will learn in class, for example, capturing or shaping. And while we're working on the dog just offering the behavior to us, the trainer is actually going to be quiet and not say any verbal cues or commands yet. Let me use an example to clarify this point. Dogs learn words by association and association only because they are very bad at linguistics. Two behaviors that we as humans, because it's human nature to repeat things when things don't work, two behaviors that we often tend to keep repeating and we tend to ruin pretty efficiently for dogs are off and leave it. If the dog starts to hear the word off the first time when they're jumping on people, and if they hear it, let's say 10 times in a row when they're already jumping on a person, they may actually think that, okay, off is permission for me to go and jump on somebody. Or if they hear the word leave it when they are trying to pick up that chicken bone from the ground or eat a Kleenex, they will think that leave it means going after it. So that's why getting the behavior is important before we start naming it. And the second step absolutely is naming the behavior, because what am I going to do with the behavior if I don't have a cue or a command that I can use to tell the dog to do it when I want them to do it? In training, we call these cues. It can also be a hand signal. It can be a verbal cue or a hand signal. It doesn't really matter. And the way to teach the meaning of these to the dog is to start saying the word when the dog is about to do it. A behavior that we as humans instinctively tend to train very, very well to our dogs is a sit. Because the first time when we train it, we actually start saying the word sit when the dog is about to put their bum on the ground. And with enough repetition, they will start to realize that, oh, wait a minute, every time I hear that word, I get rewarded for doing this behavior, and they will start doing the behavior on cue. The third part in training order or training behaviors, it's called generalization. Dogs as a species, they generalize behaviors poorly, and what this means is that if we've only practiced our sit and stay and wait in the kitchen when we are feeding the dog beside the kitchen counter with the food bowl. And if we then go outside into the park, for example, and ask them to do the same behavior, they most likely have no clue what we are asking them to do. We need to practice behaviors in different environments, pretty much in all the different environments where we want them to work. And this is just the way dogs are. Some dogs generalize better than others. When we go to those new environments, sometimes what we may have to do is we may have to lower the bar temporarily a lot until the dog starts to get it again. So the training order is first get the behavior, then name the behavior so that you can ask your dog to do it when you want it to happen, and then start generalizing it to different environments. To see some clicker training in action, let's look at this roughly 7-week-old Australian Shepherd puppy doing his or her very first clicker training exercise. This is a good example of how you get what you click and treat for. The food happens to be some sort of puppy food in a spoon just because it's a teeny tiny puppy. And what the person here is doing is she is clicking when the puppy bumps that target with her nose, and then the puppy gets a little bit of that puppy food. And you can see how enthusiastically this little puppy in his very first clicker training exercise is pounding that target with his or her nose. And this is a good example of how the precision of the clicker really speeds up the training, because if we didn't have the precision of the sound from the clicker in this type of an exercise, it would be a pretty challenging task to teach the puppy what to do. So this type of nose targeting, it is an exercise that we will do definitely in class. Your dogs will all get savvy in doing this. An easy target that you can use is actually your hand. That is a target that you always have with you. It's a wonderful attention tool to teach your dog to bump targets with their nose. As far as the technical aspect of training, something important that we need to take into consideration is canine body language whenever we are training or just interacting with our dogs. Canine body language as such, it's a huge topic, and when you come to class, we always do our best to read our dog's body language. And as I mentioned earlier, if it happens that the dog is way too stressed in the classroom environment, our goal is always to make them more comfortable so that they can learn successfully. Canine body language is all about subtle cues, and when you look at this little ladder of behaviors that says emotional arousal, and if you look at those behaviors that are marked in color green, you can see that they are called calming signals or stress signals. Then we have things like warning signs and actual bites, and when it comes to warning signs, things like growling, snarling, ear snapping, those are body language cues that are very easy for us humans to recognize, and we usually don't like seeing them because that may mean that, okay, now my dog is getting way too emotional and I may have a problem. But the most important part when it comes to canine body language is learning to recognize these subtle signs of stress or calming signals. And what we do in class is, for example, in puppy class, when the puppies are playing, instructors will always do their best to pinpoint those little body language cues. Things like turning their head away, licking their lips, doing avoidance. If all of a sudden the puppy gets really stiff or gives a bit of a whale eye, as we call it, where you can see a bit of a sideways glance with the eye whites showing, these are their way of trying to tell the environment that they are starting to get a little bit uncomfortable. The reason why it's so important to learn to recognize these signals is because usually these come before any warning signs, and it's important to recognize the subtle sign of stress before your dog's emotions start to escalate. Because when it comes to having a dog, nobody obviously wants to have a dog who has a behavior problem. So that's why learning about the body language is extremely important. You will learn more about it when you come to class, but I always like to mention this little booklet that you can see here. It's called Calming Signals on Talking Terms with Dogs, and if you are interested in body language and would like to learn a little bit more about it, but not to spend too much time on studying it, this is a nice little booklet to read that you will read in a couple of hours. A couple of last points. The purpose of training is always to make it successful, both for the dog and you, the handler, otherwise nobody wins. And when it comes to training, training is purely a mechanical skill. There is no dog whispering, No urban legends involved. It is a mechanical skill which you will learn in class. It takes time to develop it. But the beauty of clicker training is that you don't need to be afraid of making mistakes because it's very forgiving. Even if you happen to click at the wrong time a couple of times, you're not going to ruin your dog. But a few things about the mechanics. First of all, it's important that the click is well timed so that you click during the right behavior. And then when it comes to the treat delivery, you're going to have the treats in your pouch, but it is very important that your hand is not in the pouch the whole time, because if that happens, most likely they will just be staring at your treat hand and they are not going to be listening to the clicker. For example, think about when you go to the dog park and you put your hand in your pocket, all of a sudden you're extremely popular. You have 10 dogs around you because they think that you're going to deliver all of them a treat. So that is why it's so important while training that we first click, then you put your hand in your pouch and deliver the treat. Also, the way the clicker works is that the clicker is not a remote control, so you want to have both your clicker and your treat hand in a neutral position while you're training. And this is something, when you come to class, we will guide you through all of this step by step. Then when it comes to mechanics, something important that we talk about training is criteria. To make training successful, we have to set the criteria so that it actually is successful. If I have decided to do a recall across a football field with my dog while he or she is playing with 10 other dogs and a couple of squirrels walking past, if it's not going to work across that distance and with these distractions, there's no point in me repeating the recall cue because it clearly isn't working. So my task as the trainer is to make the task easier for the dog so that they can be successful, and I also get what I want out of training because my dog is responding to me. And when you're training brand new behaviors to your dog, and this is where the number of treats will be extremely important, the between 200 and 300 treats, you will actually be rewarding your dog roughly 12 times a minute when training brand new behaviors. This sounds like a lot, but it's like one of those getting hotter, getting colder games when you're doing a treasure hunt as a child. They need to get the warmest signal from us enough times. And again, to get there, it all comes down to setting the criteria. The task has to be easy enough so that we are able to reward the dog often enough. So these are mechanical aspects, and if you feel a little bit overwhelming right now, don't worry about it. This is what you come to class for. And something important to remember and realize is that even when you're not actively training, your dog is still learning. Dog learns something every second that they are awake, so it's a good idea to be prepared to be there to reinforce any good choice from your dog. We are now more or less done with this webinar version of our orientation. The take-home message from this presentation is, please email us the 3 secret words that I gave you in this presentation. Once you've emailed those to us and once you process the payment, wait for your confirmation email about your class times with all those PDF files. And then before you come to your first class, maybe go through the list of things of what to bring to class again, because this will ensure that your class experience is going to be a successful one, both for you and your dog. When you have started your program and you are practicing at home or interacting with your dog at home, if you are in doubt at any point, ask us. We are here to help you. And outside of your sort of more formal training sessions, I'd like you to think of a change in perspective. Instead of always focusing on the things that you don't want your dog to do, how about reinforcing anytime you see a behavior you like? For example, if your dog makes a choice of laying down, for example, when you're putting your shoes on instead of trying to chew your shoelaces, why don't you reinforce the laying down behavior? Or let's say you're cooking and your dog, instead of pestering you, decides to go and lay down on their bed. Definitely a behavior worth reinforcing. So you might be surprised how quickly your dog actually starts picking up on this. So for this type of stuff, you don't need a clicker, you just need yourself, maybe some occasional treats. Just give your dog lots of good stuff whenever they make choices that you consider good in your everyday lives. And then when you're practicing in more sort of official training sessions, Aim to keep the training session short enough and successful. Always set your learner up for success, and this will ensure that you are going to get good value for your training package. Thank you for listening to me, and we really look forward to seeing you in class and meeting your puppies. Here is the email address where you can send those 3 secret words. If you have any questions about anything at all, please email me, or you can also phone me at this phone number. Thank you.